Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brewcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. So those of you out there in our audience, you've joined us for past Brewcast discussions on Force Design 2030, Wargaming and Future Concepts, and Talent Management 2030. And now the last piece of the vision laid out in the 2019 Commandant's Planning Guidance has dropped into place. On January 24th, Training and Education 2030 was released, and we're excited to have two Marines from Training and Education Command ready to help us kind of walk through it and dig in deeper into some of the details. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Saville and Major Matthew Morse are going to talk to us about, among other things, impacts to future force improvements in doctrine, individual training, data sharing, PME, and lots of other good materials captured in the document. So our first guest is Lieutenant Colonel Mark Saville, who's a graduate of the School of Advanced Warfighting and currently serves as an operational planner and the Strategy and Plans Branch Head within the G5 for Training and Education Command. He has a background as an infantry officer and conducted deployments to Indo-PACOM on the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit and the Unit Deployment Program, Operation Enduring Freedom, and supported joint and allied training operations, as well as crisis and contingency operations as part of Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force Crisis Response Africa. He has also served as an instructor at the Officer Candidate School and the Basic School, and as commanding officer of Recruiting Station Denver. Our second guest today is Major Matthew Morse, who is a member of the Marine Corps Technical PhD program and recently completed his PhD on modeling and simulations at the Naval Postgraduate School. He is currently supporting Training and Education Command's Project Tripoli, which we'll discuss here as well in a couple of seconds, under the PhD PT Dynamic Employment Model. He has a background as a logistics officer and modeling and simulations officer with deployments in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and the Marine Rotational Force Darwin. He's also served as modeling and simulation officer for Marine Corps Logistics Operations Group and also serves as the M&S Officer 8825 Occupational Field Specialist in coordination with the Marine Corps Modeling and Simulation Office. So from those two backgrounds there, we've obviously got a lot of professional and fleet expertise bringing to bear on what Training Education 2030 is going to be doing for the Marine Corps under the broader structure of Force Design 2030 and the Commandant's Planning Guidance. So, gentlemen, welcome. Appreciate it. We welcome the opportunity to be able to host reps from TCOM to give us sort of the from the horse's mouth what's in the document and what we can expect to see. And I'll turn it over, sir, to you, Stu, first to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian, and to the team for allowing Major Morse and I to have the opportunity to come by today and to the wider audience for tuning in. Certainly have been a long-time listener of this podcast and immensely benefited from the exceptional discussions that have been generated on this platform over the last couple of years. So this center and the podcast has certainly been at the forefront of a wide variety of discussions with a wide audience that has provided the opportunity to generate a healthy and needed discussion on a number of key topics. So we were preparing to come and talk to the group today, reflected on really some key components over the last year of the engagements that you and the team have had that I think are a continuation of the discussion that we'll have today. So as we go through, depending upon the way the discourse and discussion and questions go, I think may highlight some of those key events that transpired in podcasts that you guys and the team have hosted to refer back to. As we think scope and flow and intent, I think unique is one of the first opportunities to discuss TE 2030 with the hopes of increasing awareness and most importantly continuing to generate a discussion that's a critical topic that will require continued innovation and creative thought. And arguably what better place to foster that discussion than the Krulak Center on this podcast. So from a flow perspective, what we discuss basically provide a brief overview of the key aspects of Training and Education 2030, go a little bit deeper and provide an overview from a Training and Education Command perspective in the vision and approach, and then specifically, at least for Matt and I, to cover some key topics of areas that we have focused on since coming to Training and Education Command more recently, and then open it up for questions. I think Matt would agree with me, at least, that certainly don't have the answer to all the questions, and we are certainly colored by our own experiences personally and professionally in our growth and development, but already know that there's a number of folks that are joining us from the virtual audience and a number of subject matter experts that are out there that can likely contribute to the dialogue and foster the discussion and the debate that will transpire for however long we go today. I think important, at least initially, building on the brief bios and perspective for at least Matt and I. For me personally, coming to TCOM G5 in the last 6 months, really in August in earnest, coming out of school, and then having the opportunity to settle into the G5, have touched a wide variety of projects. Some of those certainly training and education 2030 related, but I would say specifically Project Trident that we'll get into a little bit later is one area that I've certainly focused on, and we'll turn it over to Matt, at least initially, to cover some of his focus areas.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, and so I just graduated, like I said, in September, the PhD program, Model and Simulations, and as part of that Tech PhD program, we have the dynamic employment model where we all sit at OAD. We provide some assistance to OAD, myself a lot with the Marine Corps M&S office, but I am sitting at TCOM to help address Project AAA, to help build this persistent live virtual constructive training environment capability and really get at a lot of the obstacles that I saw as an M&S officer, I've seen as an officer in general, leveraging our simulation capabilities, and just very heartened to see the team that we've brought together, a lot of people I've worked with over the years, and the way that we're framing this problem space, and we're getting after what really are just a lot of systemic obstacles that have prevented us from leveraging all of our simulation capabilities, a lot of ones that we've had for a long time, in the best way. And so I'll get into greater detail on this, but it's across the people, the processes, the systems, and TCOM providing a lot of leadership going forward on how to integrate them rather than just providing tools. We're going to actually lead in how to integrate and deploy them.
So I think initially just kind of providing the overview from a Training and Education 2030 perspective as a recently published document to help at least level set the discussion and provide some framework for the dialogue. As you rightly highlighted, this is really a continuation of General Berger's priorities laid out within the Commandant's planning guidance, beginning principally with Force Design 2030, going to Talent Management 2030, and now with a third installment with Training and Education 2030. As we frame the discussion, principally focused, at least initially, on the problem statement or what we would identify as a problem statement, clearly highlighted and bolded within TE 2030 that the current training and education system is not preparing the Marine Corps with the knowledge and range of skills required for the future operating environment. So as we continue to neck that down and look at the service vision, kind of three bins that we've at least identified that we'll hit briefly, talking modernization, training and the reimagination of training, and then looking at standards writ large. So if we focus on modernization and look at the emerging concepts and the mission sets that we will be required to execute now and into the future, it requires new ways to train and educate the force ultimately. So number of examples to include modernization of training areas and ranges, talking to the application of information age learning tools, or the continued application and advancement of modern learning and student-centered approaches. From a reimagination of training, certainly Matt is already starting to talk to that and creating that globally connected live virtual training environment that enables a realistic training for multi-domain operations, expanding integrated naval training and education to prepare Marines to seamlessly employ and deploy with integrated fires in the naval and joint fight, and then the ability to encourage Marines to accelerate and expand their learning through incentivized skills progression that's out there. Lastly, and probably one of the most important elements in standards, those rigorous and repeatable standards that will continue to form the bedrock and the foundation for all training, education, and assessments. But those vital sets and repetitions that are critical to increasing combat lethality, and ultimately if you practice not till you get it right, but you practice till you can't get it wrong. Being able to hold fast and true to our immutable high standards and to continue that legacy, building upon the generations of Marines that have come before us, understanding and knowing that the title Marine is always earned and not compromising those standards. So I think as we consider the how, there's clearly 37 directed actions and 17 issues for further analysis Not going to principally focus on those directed tasks or areas for further analysis, but we'll attempt to hit some of the key points that at least exist within Training Education 2030 is currently written, and you already spoke to some of those, Ian. Certainly doctrine and the update requirements for some of our doctrinal publications to better align with Force Design 2030 and enable that decisive maneuver in the future fight will certainly serve as a bedrock from which all things build. As we look to making Marines and that sacred responsibility to consider how we can leverage some key lessons that we've learned through some recent entry-level training efforts, while also balancing that against how we stay true to the time-tested processes and procedures that are in place to retain those high standards. From a military occupational specialty perspective in that training, the continued adaptation within our formal learning centers to integrate technology, incentivize that skills progression, and evaluate our training management. For professional military education, certainly here within MCU and Education Command, key elements continue to increase the rigor and relevance of professional military education, incentivizing that excellence and something near and dear to your heart, the expansion of wargaming, as something that I know you have certainly been a large part of. As we look to service level training exercises, continuing in those critical events to incorporate a thinking and adaptive adversary into our realistic force-on-force training scenarios that replicate that future operating environment will continue to remain essential. Also highlights shared data and some of the key points within the document, leveraging learning technologies, consolidating command and control structure as it relates to human performance, certainly investing in instructor development and training to retain our exceptional Marines. And last and certainly not least, unit level training, where we seek to modernize training systems, those simulations and environments to enable training with the modernized capabilities and platforms. Ultimately, that arrives at the goal or the desired end state that the Marine Corps training and education ecosystem leverages that technology, is data-driven, and effectively utilizes the resources to develop Marines who are cognitively agile, problem solvers, capable of making bold and consequential decisions in an uncertain environment. With that, I'll pause if Matt has anything additional to add before we kind of talk some TCOM consideration.
So the only thing I'll add to that is that there's a theme that runs throughout all of these, which is a need across every one of those primary lines of effort, if you will, to make sure we're tying in with Force Design 2030 efforts across the board, across the rest of the Marine Corps, because we need to make sure that we're designing our training environments, designing our education to meet the needs of how we're going to be fighting with these future concepts and tasks that we're going to be conducting, because we can't go and design our training environments, build these simulations based off of our understanding of how we fought in the past. It has to be relative to how we're going to be fighting in the future. And so TCOM can't do that in a vacuum. We're really going to have to be integrating and partnering a lot more with CD&I and everyone else involved in defining what are those processes, procedures, and standards for how we go forward.
So I think as we internalize the Commandant's vision outline in Training Education 2030, it's certainly critical to nest TCOM's vision and approach with that guidance. So in discussions, want to at least provide an overview of what we have termed as TCOM's 522. I think start really with TCOM's mission, and excuse me for reading, but just to provide the baseline for the group and for the audience, and going back to that nesting. So for TCOM's mission to lead the Marine Corps training and education continuum from individual entry-level training, professional military education, and continuous professional development through unit, collective, and service level training in order to produce warfighters and enhance warfighting organizations that enable the Fleet Marine Forces to build and sustain the combat readiness required to fight and win today and the future. So I think Training Education 2030 certainly provides a framework by which to visualize the current state of where we are and ultimately the desired end state of what we want to achieve. And to achieve that desired end state, I think it's necessary for the enterprise to, one, sustain the organization's 5 foundational tasks that we'll talk to while conducting an iterative and holistic modernization of the training and education continuum aligned to Force Design 2030 to ensure the force is prepared and postured to meet the requirements of the current and future operating environment. So as we get into that 522 approach that I alluded to earlier, it really starts with the 5 pillars or the foundational tasks and enduring missions that TCOM does day on, stay on, every single day that's out there. It should be of no surprise, and is certainly nested within Training and Education 2030, that first pillar and task, transforming civilians into Marines. Second, providing that initial and advanced military occupational specialty training. 3, providing support to unit level training via home station training, the execution of our service level training exercises, and ultimately where we are in providing PME across both the officer and enlisted communities and those respective continuums. So those are the underpinnings or the breadbox. If I look to the framework of a house that make up our critical and foundational tasks, and then transition into the first set of twos, the 2 change vectors, and principally those are aligned to our modernization efforts and our force design efforts. We'll speak specifically to 3 projects, and we'll allow Matt to talk initially about Project Tripoli. I'll discuss Project Trident and Project Triumph following. But over to you, Matt.
So I'll just be brief because I'll be going into this a little bit more depth in a minute. But Project Tripoli, really, we're creating a persistent live virtual constructive training environment for all Marines, all domains, all echelons. And what that really means, if you don't know live virtual constructive, so live is real Marines operating real systems. Virtual is real Marines operating simulated systems like SAVT, Combat Convoy Simulator. And then constructive is simulated people operating simulated systems. So that's your constructive simulations like MACTAF Tactical Warfare Simulation. If you're conducting battle staff training, battalion and above, that's where you're simulating aggregate units in order to populate your real-world information systems and even stimulate those virtual simulations. And so the Marine Corps has done LVC for a long time, but the way we've done it has oftentimes and mostly been these large events where we fly out all the engineers and we bring in through brute force all these different simulation capabilities that we tie together. And those are great training events for large staffs. But what we need to do is start bringing that capability down to the lower levels, and we need to make it more persistent at all levels. So that's what we're doing with Project Tripoli, is addressing all of the obstacles, all the standards we need to provide, the new tools and simulations we need to provide in order to expand access to LVC environments at all of those levels, and also enhance what we're able to represent in those LVC training environments as well.
So transitioning into the second project with Project Trident is primarily oriented on building and expanding naval integration and training and education. And the standardization and how the Navy Marine Corps team trains for maritime fires and effects will provide each of the service with a measurable training benchmark for how to fight alongside one another. Trident also will expand the number of training opportunities for Marines and sailors have together working, and increase our understanding of service integrated fighting concepts and how to employ them effectively. And then the third project, Project Triumph, which we won't get into too greater detail today, but for setting conditions for the larger part of the discussion, is the overarching Marine Corps concept for student-centered learning, technical upgrades within the classrooms, and asynchronous learning. It represents an acknowledgement that every Marine learns differently and at different speeds compared to their peers. And underpinning this effort is a learning model that embraces learning through experience, discussion, and decisive decision making, instead of often an industrial age learning model relying upon memorization. So as we have our first 5, our first 2, and then getting into the last 2 for our guiding principles are really principles that help guide both the foundational tasks and then those change vectors, and those 2 guiding principles are rigorous and repeatable standards and combat lethality. So understanding the critical nature of having the vital sets and repetitions necessary to increase combat lethality, interlaced and interwoven throughout the first 5 and the 2. So it's with that understanding of the 5-2-2 framework that will provide a little bit more detailed look and turn it back over to Matt to go into a little bit greater detail on Project Tripoli.
So when we talk about LVC, live virtual constructive training environments, like I said, these are conducted across the Marine Corps. They're battle simulation centers, your TSCs, different schoolhouses, and especially McDog, McLaug, and MSTP. These are some of the leaders in employing and providing these capabilities and integrating these simulations. And so what we're looking to provide to those different schoolhouses and all training officers across the Marine Corps is this combination of the new systems, the new simulations, and the guidance and guidelines for how to integrate and employ those tools. And so when you talk about systems, we're not just going and building all new simulations. We are definitely doing that. We have new virtual and augmented reality simulations that we're deploying out there with JTAC Virtual Trainer and Warfighter Augmented Reality. But one way we're getting at fielding, deploying a quicker capability is better leveraging existing simulations. And there's a whole slew of simulations that we've had available to us and we have used across the Marine Corps in different degrees that are available from the Joint Force. And that is Joint Deployment Logistics Model, JCATS, JSAF, which is the Navy's primary constructive simulation, AFSIM, which is the Air Force's simulation. And each one of these simulations has different strengths and weaknesses, which makes sense coming from the different communities or services that are providing them. And so one thing we are doing in order to rapidly improve some of our training capabilities is overcome those obstacles to federating the simulations. And so I'll go a little bit into details here. Federating is a term that is often misused and is something that in the Marine Corps we haven't really done because we haven't addressed what are the infrastructure that we need in terms of the systems, the processes, and the knowledge in order to federate simulations. That's a particular way of integrating your sims that allows you to have more functionality where you can use one sim for certain strengths, use another sim for other strengths, and then pass entities between them in one continuous environment. And so by going down this path and building federations and still using other protocols where we don't really need federations, we're just going to be increasing the tool set available to all those simulations professionals. We'll be decreasing the time that it takes them to build and execute these environments, and that'll make it available, much more available and persistent to all Marines. Because currently if you go and you ask for a training evolution, you want to have multiple simulation capabilities, there's a lot of time that goes into making sure that the parametric data, the data that inside of each of the sims, the data tagging for the different types of entities is aligned between all the different simulations. That's a lot of manpower that delays the time for actually fielding that capability. And so one thing that TCOM can do is take leadership in defining standards and actually putting manpower towards implementing those standards ourselves, getting the workforce that can maintain them and maintain databases of terrain models and 3D models that are available for all Marines and all training organizations. So by doing this, we're really expanding the scope of how we use these simulations and increasing the number of sims that are available to everybody. One way that we have to get after this is really a transition away from a platform-centric focus to a functional focus. It's looking at not just how am I managing SAVT, MTWAS, Combat Convoy Simulator, but having someone who's covering down on terrain databases for all simulations, all 3D models, parametric data, and authoritative data sources. And by doing that, not only do we build our capabilities, we also open the door for greater integration with the Joint Force and greater integration across other efforts across the Marine Corps. And so talking to the Marine Corps side, we have the MCWAC, Marine Corps Wargaming Analysis Center, where a lot of the problems that we need to address, functional areas that we need to address to create this persistent LVC environment are also areas that MCWAC needs to address. That includes things like SimC2 integration, taking your simulation ground truth data and populating your real world C2 systems and other information systems so that you're training people and conducting war games where decision makers are using their actual information system. And that gets at things like protocol standardization. It also gets at bringing on new technology like robotic process automation, where it automates the actual interactions with the graphic user interface. And those are capabilities I'm personally very excited about, particularly with RPA, because that's what my dissertation was in. And I know this is a capability we can use. It's commercial off the shelf in a variety of different vendors that we can automate. How are we populating all of these different operational information systems and bring in many more staff members and functional areas or warfighting functions to actually be represented in these staff training and other training environments. And then getting at the Joint Force, just attended the Joint Training Synthetic Environment Working Group, JTSE, with the Joint Staff J7 last week. And across the Joint Force and with the J7 themselves, there's a lot of effort getting at all of these function areas. So with organizing ourselves in this way, we are enabling ourselves to better integrate with them and position ourselves to better bring on these joint staff and joint force tools, simulations and other simulation tools, and also better influence making sure that those tools are meeting our requirements to support the Marine Corps.
I'll wrap it up just, again, providing a little bit more detail as it relates to Project Trident. Again, focused principally naval training and education integration with a heavy emphasis on the training and education required to integrate combined joint naval kill webs. So looking back at the 2020 advantage at sea, stating that the Naval Service is seeking to develop an integrated all-domain naval force through training and education, capabilities and networks, plans, exercise, experiments, analysis and wargaming, investments in innovation and force design. The training and education is clearly identified as a critical component in achieving that desired intent. And it's the team's contention that training and education must inform and be informed by the other methods indicated in this guidance. So ultimately, it's not just the technology, but the individuals who form the teams that constitute the critical ingredients to fight and win as part of a naval force, as part of a joint force, and as part of a combined force. So to train and educate integrated all-domain naval forces as a cohesive team, it's necessary, again, to possess those rigorous or repeatable standards that increase combat lethality. So as we look to enabling combat readiness of warfighting organizations by enhancing naval training and education to support the integration and closure of those combined joint and naval kill webs, it's not solely achieved either through a single program of instruction or the creation of a single course, but a holistic look at the totality of the training and education continuum and looking at it from yellow footprints through a Marine's entire career of how do you professionally grow, develop that individual to be capable of operating within the envisioned current and future operating environment. Certainly what Matt spoke to with Project Tripoli and the live virtual constructive training environment is a critical component of this effort and mutually supports what we are seeking to achieve with Project Trident. Because of the complexity that Matt rightly highlighted of developing and executing training to prepare the force to fight in the envisioned environment. And then simultaneously, Triumph, as outlined before, mutually supports this effort by defining those rigorous and repeatable standards, as well as the enabling development of the cognitive decision-making abilities of the force writ large. So I think from there, tracing back to the flow, general overview of training and education 2030, some TEPCOM vision and approach and implications and considerations, and then a deep dive at least into two of the projects within those change vectors. So with that, we'll probably pause and turn it over into you or to the audience for questions.
Great, thank you, sir. Thank you both for laying that all out. And we do have some questions already starting to come in here, but I want to tee up a couple here that we got sort of from internal collection before we go there. Like I said, like a lot of stuff, it sounds very exciting, and for me as a former forward air controller, the JTAC virtual trainer, it sounds like it's probably a lot of fun and a much better virtual training experience than what I went through a long time ago. On the starting with the Project Trident and the Tri-Service strategy, I know obviously like U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Navy, big partners, right? That's a big picture of it. Is the Coast Guard getting pulled into how Project Trident is going to go? Because they're that third service in the strategy, and they operate in sort of that day-to-day competition spectrum,
Sure.
right? So how are they going to play into the Project Trident piece?
Sure, absolutely. And I think initially over the last 6 months worth of work, a wide variety of forums and a wide variety of groups and organizations across the Naval Service that are seeking to figure out the way forward, especially as it relates to training and education. So I think for us, at least in our efforts thus far, some key partners and forums that we've found via the Maritime Working Group and the Naval Board, the Naval Education Training Task Force, as well as things like the Fleet Training Integration Program are three critical areas that where we've initially started, and certainly acknowledging the need as we expand the scope of Trident, that the Coast Guard is a critical partner as part of that tri-service naval strategy collectively for us. And as Ian, you rightly highlight are in it day in and day out. So that is an area that is aspirational at this point as we continue to move forward in integrating one with the Navy, the Joint Force, our combined partners, as well as with our brothers and sisters in the Coast Guard.
So I'll just say that this relationship between Trident and Tripoli is really key for making sure that we are informing our own efforts in building the simulation environment. So as we better understand how exactly do we tie in with the Navy, with the future concepts we're pursuing, how do we tie in with the Coast Guard, that informs not only our prioritization but also the very design of the simulation support training environments that we create to make sure we're representing them appropriately when we're training people for the right tasks.
I think to that point, just to close out, the unique relationships that do exist. So as we look from a training and education lens, we can also look to our partners in the operating forces in the fleets and within the Fleet Marine Force, and a significant number of effort and work at the componency level and certainly at the MEF and at the numbered fleet level, both with Navy partners but also with the Coast Guard. So you can see tri-service strategies and memorandums of agreement out there with the fleet, seeking to replicate some of those key lessons learned as we've been in and exploring that space.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, another question we had from inside MC here was asking about the application of Training Education 2030 to the civilian workforce. Sure. In some of the other force design documents, there were certain focus pieces that were broken out there. What is the focus group the focus going to be for the civilians who are going to be impacted? Because as you said, some of those exercises, for example, take like a ton of civilian support to build those out and then execute them.
Yeah, I think both Matt and I probably have comments too. I'll at least probably start at the end of the day, one team, one fight, and it's a whole force effort when we look at it amongst uniformed Marines, our civilians, and then the contract workforce as well. Totality of the effort when you look across the TCOM enterprise and the service writ large. And to the points made before, Training Education 2030 is a continuation of force design and talent management that speaks to the importance of that. I think as we look principally at instructors, faculty, staff, and the cadres, most everywhere you go across the enterprise, we're identifying those individuals as a center of gravity. That's a reality that we see, and there are several directed actions within Training and Education 2030 that highlights the need for that professional growth and that professional development of those key center of gravity members for us. I think personally from my own experience as well, that civilian workforce has been a critical component of me and my professional growth and development. If that was my time at the basic school and those engagements that I just had with that same individual that I had working there this past week, talking about the efforts that he's had and focused in that key area. We can see that across the board as we go down to the operational force units and the training support centers that Matt highlighted that provide critical enabling support, and then all the things you don't see. When we talk curriculum development and the administrative and the policy requirements that are necessary to keep the train on the tracks collectively. So I go back to the one team, one fight, whole force effort to achieve the objectives outlined, certainly within Training Education 30 and then within Training Education Command.
Yeah, and you make a great point about the number of civilians that are a part of building all of those exercises, because we have, give or take, 16 modeling and simulation officers supporting the Marine Corps at any given time. We rotate out every 3 years, and so really most of the expertise, the manpower, and certainly the continuity comes from those GSs and contractors at every one of those different training organizations. And so everything we're saying in here with TE 2030 is providing that support, that guidance, and I'll reiterate, support to them, because all of these standards and tools that we're going to be providing them and repositories is going to be helping them get away from being a one-man shop or two-man shop, along with an 8825 who just came on last year to build out these exercises. So we're actually helping to enable them to do what they've been trying to do and have been doing a good job of for the last several years, or for decades, many of them. But there's a better way to do this that needs us to actually facilitate actually applying knowledge management and providing some standards.
All right, great. Thank you both. In that knowledge management piece, actually, I'm going to start going into the questions in the chat here. And Matt, this might be more in your lane initially, because I'll be honest, I don't understand what half the terms in this question are. So I'm hoping you do. But this is from one of the seated folks who's on the line here, asking How much do you see XAPI statement generation and learning record store capability, communication capability playing into the live virtual constructive tools that are out there?
One of the problems, one of the issues that we have to address when we talk about assigning simulations to TNRs, I'll say, is identifying what exactly are performance measures. Performance measures really can capture many things and takes it beyond just saying, is this accomplished, is it not accomplished, and it gets at what are the cues that the user needs to receive, what are the actions that they need to take, and what's the feedback they need to be receiving. That's how you really develop their understanding. That's how you actually train someone and educate them on the task that they're trying to fulfill and help them grow and improve. So I think that that's one area that I'll say that we need to take a hard look at when we start talking about how we're going to capture their performance data, is for every single LVC environment, every single training environment period, you need to have a good solid understanding of what are the performance measures and then what are the performance measurement tools that you can use given the different LVC or simulation supported constructs or environments to get at the documentation and the appropriate feedback to developing expertise in those areas. So this is one I'm looking forward to engaging with the other sides within TCOM, because I know with Project Triumph, that's something they're probably going to be getting after.
Next question coming from one of our faculty members here, asking if thoughts or some input on what TCOM envisions in terms of applying more rigor to specifically Officer PME, and specifically he's asking about Expeditionary Warfare School and Command and Staff College.
So I think taking a stab at it in this from a personal perspective more so than anything, as we look collectively across both training and education, I think sometimes we get into the binary sense of it's training or it's education, and there's a clear distinguishing line and a difference. So as we look at it, if it's the officer PME continuum over time, how are we progressively building in the rigorous nature of what that looks like based on what we're seeing in the emerging concepts. So I think we'll go back to the changes that we're seeing from a threat perspective, the operating environment and what has changed within that operating environment at a very rapid rate and a very rapid level, at least from a Project Trident perspective. If we talk C5 ISRT, if we talk all domain combined arms, there are rapid changes that we within the operating forces, those in the training and education command space, we have to look at the totality of the continuum, especially as it relates to officers. So my experience at EWS in a residency may need to change from what we had previously seen in order to account for those changes within the operating environment.
Good. Okay.
I'll take that answer.
All right, great, thank you. All right, next question. This kind of actually goes back to the civilian workforce from a slightly different angle. And the question is whether this is you mentioned aspirational, sir, but it's not just aspirational. There's a lot of very broad-ranging lines of effort here across training, education, spectrum. And as with any attempts to change, sometimes there can be, resistance or pushback, because that's the way we've always done it, right? It was good enough. Has there been any sense that there's resistance to these things coming down for the people who've been doing things a certain way for a long time, or has there been more of an embrace, like, hey, we recognize that this is going to make it better, and let's go out and do it?
Yeah, so I would say, at least initially, and Matt can jump on this, certainly with something like Tripoli, but from my perspective, from the start with the CPG and really before that, continuing on to force design and talent management, the energy behind the system that's in there, there's elements contained within training and education 2030 that we're already doing as an institution, as an organization. You guys are a prime example of what has been transpiring, if it's wargaming, if it's fostering innovative and creative thought just within the Krulak Center, the efforts within MCU, if it's the wargaming cloud. There are efforts that are ongoing, and that energy is there. So I think it's being able to take a hard look as we look at the guidance provided, as we look at the vision and the approach, continuing to energize that system, because the speed of change needs to happen. And those are the components and the discussions that we're having collaboratively amongst the groups. But I'll let Matt jump in to add any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I haven't really seen any pushback. I think Mr. Joe Lumagino, who kind of has been spearheading the Project Tripoli for a while, or from inception, he did a good job of pulling together the whole community, especially with kickoff that happened last May, I think it was. So bringing everybody together, getting their input, and then we've continued to try and make sure we're always reaching out, including ITSIC just in December, and since then bringing in the M&S representatives for the different training organizations every time we're having a big meeting to talk through all of where we're going. And I think one way that we get around some of that problem of pushback that we might expect to encounter would be we're not just directing. We're not just saying this is what you're going to do. We are saying here are the tools, here are the standards, the processes, procedures to get at doing things that we've been wanting to do as a community for a long time. And just talk about the knowledge management capability on its own, that's something that in the M&S community for training, we've been talking for decades about the need for having a knowledge management tool so that we can stop doing proof of concept over and over again, so that we can share simulation architectures, so that we can reuse all the tools and capabilities across all the different training organizations. And so I think by taking that, we are here to help and actually facilitate rather than just direct and leave you to it, I think that's going to change any sort of concern about pushback.
I think I might add to in what you have done on the podcast and some of the speeds that you've had on the show. So if we look at things that we're doing or things that are changing, so Lieutenant Colonel Brian Kerg and Tyler Quinn coming out speaking about unclassified wargaming efforts that they partook in here in PME. If you go back to Lieutenant Colonel Andy Hornfeck and Jesse Knight talking about MLRT that's in execution this month with 3rd MLR and MAGTAF TC in the desert on the west coast of California in execution. So if that's Advanced Marksmanship Training Program with Colonel Jones coming out from Weapons Field Training Battalion, in the last 6 months, this platform has showcased the fact that the organization is moving out with and in line and in step with the guidance. So I think we're already seeing it happen, and we're continuing to evolve and grow as an organization. It just needs to continue to have that energy in the discourse. I know informing Trident, I go back to papers written at EWS, going back to the previous comment I've written at Command Staff, written at SOV, written at TLS, go out to MPS and starting to pull some of those thesis papers and works. That has certainly been hugely beneficial for me in contributing to the discussion. So Saville's perspective that the energy is there, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people already moving out in the guidance and continuing to push. So just some additional thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you, sir. And I'm glad you brought up the Wargaming Cloud, because obviously that was a very a big project that's been built out over a couple of years, and now it's operational. And but in terms of not just directing but providing the tools, the cloud got built, and then there's been guidance here for really since the Commandant's Plan and guidance came out of thou shalt do more wargaming. Like that was pretty clear in the guidance, and so AECOM started building the plan, but you needed tools. So that cloud has become a very highly used tool. I've been seeing it in more of the schools and the courses, so that they're getting plugged into what tabletop or paper exercises used to be. And I'll say right now, with Mr. Barrick has put together, our wargaming director, a tool or a tournament to help sort of do some beta testing on like how much volume can the cloud handle at one time. And a lot of the teams that are in this tournament are the civilian faculty and staff over at the schools. And I'll say from after the first round, they're in there putting up quite a fight. I've had some personally very sad losses on some of those scenarios, but they got the tool, and not only have they tried it, they're deep into learning how it works and how they can make it work for them.
Yeah, and I think, and Matt and I had the conversation earlier that builds on that exact comment, is not only what's transpiring that's helping that individual within their respective time within PME, but the exposure to those types of capabilities that as they go back to the operating forces, the ability to infuse that within their subordinates, to be knowledgeable that these types of capabilities do exist, and how can I take those lessons that I learned within PME through wargaming and the other efforts that are ongoing to be able to integrate that into your own professional military education programs with the units, taking wargaming, applying that to co-comparison and decision, and how can I take some of those skills that are there. So again, sets and reps when we talk about rigorous, repeatable standards, but the decision-making aspect and ultimately that desired end state goal and objective laid out within TE 2030 certainly reinforced through those efforts.
Yes, and I think the cloud is one example of that thing you take with you. Like sad I'm probably not going to be around the Marine Corps long enough to really see it get out across the fleet, but it is this thing, you just need a device and a connection, and you'll be able to tap into, the richness that's in there and use it for all of those things you mentioned, sir. All right, I'll go back to the chat here, another question, and this is specifically about cybersecurity training, and asking whether the training is not always necessarily sort of kept up to date to the threat and the challenges out there. So is there anything specifically on the cybersecurity training side that's being done to bring it up to the threats in the environment we face today?
So I'll say that this is a big topic of conversation, including at the JITSI working group, is all the services talking about what are all the different tools that exist out there, cyber ranges and otherwise, to facilitate getting at that. And there's a lot of focus on this, and there are really, I've been into two different types of training. One is cyber for cyber. For the cyber warriors, their cyber ranges, make sure we're representing for them all the threats and actions they need to be able to take in order to counter those threats. And then there's cyber for others, which is understanding how exactly are those threats going to manifest in your actual information systems, C2 systems, and how do you counter, and then how do you engage with those cyber operators. So those are two areas that we're getting after, needing to make sure that not only do the cyber guys have everything they need, but how do we better represent all those effects in other training environments? And that's definitely a big focus of effort for us.
And I would say just certainly not within my complete scope or wheelhouse at the end of the day, but going back to the training aspect of that, but also the doctrinal aspect of that. So as you look, I think in Task 3 of TE 2030, there's the ability to provide feedback on the prioritization as it relates to doctrine, if that's your MCDPs, WPs, TPs, and IPs. But there's also an element of those TNR standards that are there and constantly evolving and changing and being able to keep pace that is specifically lined out within the guidance. So I think acknowledges the speed by which things change and our ability to surge capacity. Proto-doctrine is identified within the document as well, to be able to ensure that we're not falling behind in some of those key capabilities. Again, not deep in my scope in the cyberspace, but from a little bit larger zoom out.
All right, thank you, sir. So speaking of doctrine, one of the things that Training Education 2030 lays out is highlighting how TCOM is the lead for doctrinal development for the Marine Corps. And you sort of just mentioned it a little while ago, sir, about how going back and looking at student papers and theses and stuff like that has helped inform some of the future outlook for training education. So can Education Command potentially, is there an opportunity for a greater role for, the work already being done? You mentioned the papers, stuff like Lieutenant Colonel Kerr and Major Quinn doing in the young class wargaming and sharing that in feeding some more of that stuff back into the development of the future doctrine that's going to be needed to execute this.
Sure, and I think reinforces the points made before, at least personally for me, of being able to rely upon that research. My contention is that Education Command and MCU is already influencing and playing a role in doctrinal development. So formally and informally are kind of two separate and distinct pieces in there. I've shared my personal experience of how that has helped me at least widen my aperture in my considerations for thinking, relying upon those. I think something we can do a better job, and certainly through this means, but also taking things like Training Education 20, taking Command General TCOM's guidance, incorporating that into things at Marine Corps University or NPS, if it's research calls for study. So every academic year, are we refreshing that based on the guidance that we're receiving, so we can have that iterative discussion and feedback and enlist the support of those students going through school. I know at least the two papers that I've written in resident school, both at EWS and here at SAW, directly related to training and education topics. There's a wide variety of topics that are out there, leveraging the capabilities at places like NPS and being able to look at those things. So for me, if we're seeking a more active role where a student is directly engaged in the writing of doctrine, I think that's slightly different. I have to rely back on my own experience this last year. On top of my course load, I probably wasn't touching the writing of doctrine. That's probably just in my own shortfall in professional capabilities, but I believe it's there. We can do things to foster a greater discussion on certain platforms, information sharing that ties to it, to answer the question, I think.
And I'll just reiterate on the Naval Postgraduate School piece. I know that the students out there are hungry for guidance and assistance in identifying what are relevant topics, because most everybody at NPS has to do a thesis or a dissertation. And I know my first time through, trying to find that good thesis topic that would be relevant and actually help the Marine Corps and also enable me to better employ what I learned when I get back to the fleet was definitely something I wanted. But I wasn't as prepared to actually research something relevant until I returned again for the dissertation time, and I was able to get at a problem I understood very well on SimC2 interoperability. So right now is the time for Naval Research Working Group input. I think we have another month and a half or so until that NERWIG is going to happen, and that's where Naval Postgraduate School takes all of these requests for research and presents them to the students and the professors. Says, here you go, here are the relevant topics that need to be addressed. So that's definitely a tool that we need to be using, that at TCOM we're very much looking forward to using that, especially on my side for the modeling and simulations officers, to help us not only get at some hard problems, but also make sure that in that 6 months, 9 months, a year of their life that they are going in a deep dive into a topic, that it is a very important topic for the Marine Corps and for them professionally.
I think just to add one last point to it, you get that connecting file through a process similar to that, where you're able to facilitate and provide those research questions and opportunities at the various locations. You then tie that back to a Matt Morse that's directly involved in the process and the subject matter experts that are there, or if it's a Trident related topic, can provide some context and background to support the discussion. Again, meaningful, informed, and drilling down into areas that we're focusing on that may offer a different approach.
All right, thanks, sir. So we'll do one more question here in the chat, and then we'll wrap it up because we're hitting about an hour mark here. So question ties actually back to a previous brewcast, and I think he's referring to the one about the Advanced Marksmanship Training Program, where Colonel Jones had noted, like, the people who went through, they felt like it was a really, like, their skills were better, right? Like, it was value added, and it made them, better in that particular realm of what they were supposed to do for professional marksmanship. So for some of those other things you both mentioned that are sort of already in place and moving forward, have you gotten feedback that this is making what used to be good better? Are people feeling more confident in their capabilities after going through a new POI, compared to what the previous iteration used to be?
Sure. So I think anecdotally, a number of options that are out there, ones that come to mind specifically highlighted within TA 2030 is the Infantry Marine course and the key lessons that we're learning there, and how to potentially apply those across the entry-level training pipeline. That is certainly one. AMTP and the efforts that are ongoing, Weapons Field Training Battalion and those teams. I think the iterative process that we're seeing of how can that be more universally applied. Commandant School undergoing similar proofs of concept or pilot courses that are continuing to evolve and push the ball forward. So I would say those feedback loops internally within the TCOM enterprise, but I think within TA 2030 it also highlights the feedback loop coming back from the fleet back into those individual schools, back to PME institutions of are we providing what it is you need? Because there's always a natural tension that is going to exist between the Fleet Marine Forces and back to the institutional supporting establishment in places like Training and Education Command. But that dialogue needs to continue to develop, and I think the partnerships building, developing, sustaining are critical to inform that, especially as we consider the ecosystem and the training and education continuum in its totality, not silos of excellence that we're very good at doing niche individual things within our respective commands within that training and education continuum, but looking at it holistically. And that requires crosstalk internally within the organization, within Training and Education Command, amongst the DCs and the other partners within the institutional supporting establishment, and then within the fleet. So tentacles everywhere as we look to assessment specifically, and certainly highlighted very much in Training and Education 2030 of how do we improve that process, data-driven, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and a whole host of other places, both formally and informally, to improve that feedback loop, make well-resource informed decisions. So,
when it comes to actually seeing the return on the investment, return on the effort, We're still pretty early days, but we do have a bunch of those specific capabilities like JVT, like WAR, that we've had prototypes out there that get a lot of positive feedback on them. When it comes to the actual LVC of tying all those capabilities together, in the next few months, in 2TAC and then 4TAC 23, we're going to have more demonstration of those capabilities, and we'll be getting more feedback at those times. One thing I'd reiterate is we need to keep focus on not just what are these capabilities we're fielding right now and how well do they work in those instances, but making sure we're staying aware on what is the effort, what are the processes, procedures that go into creating those LVC events, so we don't do what we've done in the past, which is focus on a large-scale exercise, create a great capability, but it's not repeatable. And so that's something we are really focusing on, is make sure these capabilities that we're fielding, we're making sure we do it in a rigorous way to create a repeatable, persistent capability.
All right, great. Thank you both. And so that brings us right up to about an hour here. So I think we had a great wide-ranging discussion. Any final thoughts or comments either one of you would like to share?
No, again, I just say thanks for the opportunity and the time. Hopefully a continuation of this discussion that we'll continue to see in a wide variety of forms. I think specific to the Krulak Center here at MCU, being present here today, that continued dialogue and discussion is critical, as we highlighted, and taking advantage of the opportunity and the time to review, read documents like Training and Education 2030, and as we look to the future academic years, how do we incorporate and continue that discussion to where we can continue to advance the concepts and ideas that are here. But appreciate you and the team's work, certainly advancing this ahead of a lot of groups.
I'll just say on the Tripoli side, I think I said this once or twice, but there are a lot of areas for us to have mutually supporting efforts, especially when you start talking about the wargaming, the parametric data, conceptual models, everything that you have going into those war games, the SimC2 interoperability. There are so many opportunities for us to partner and integrate those efforts. And so really look forward to engaging more with MCU as well as OAD, McWill, to make sure that we're using and taking advantage of those.
Great, thank you. And yeah, as you said, sort of like we were talking about this, I think, a little before we started recording, but it's been, on our side, it's great to have access to the planners who are helping sort of build these larger concepts, but it's also been good to have these opportunities like talking to McTog about how do these higher level stuff, like how does it actually impact the bulk of the Marines are going through their day-to-day training, preparation for deployment, improving personal unit skills, things like that. And it's been definitely great to have access to people who can show us, this isn't just like, words on a paper. There is change happening in lots of different areas across the fleet. So when we say, we're moving forward in the 21st century, like it's not just words, like it's happening in lots of different places. So this is just another iteration of that, being able to show, it's not only here, like it's been here for a little bit while, depending on which part of the pie that you touch here.
Sure.
All right, so gentlemen, thank you both very much for your time coming down here. Look forward to getting this one out to our wider audience out there. To the virtual audience, thanks for joining us again today. Promise we're not going to be doing 3 episodes a week next week. We'll reel it back in a little bit, but we do hope you join us next week because we'll be advertising here in the next couple of days. Next Brewcast, we're going to have a chance to talk to several Marines. We're going to have a panel from the Combat Art program, and one or two of the folks have already had touch points with the Krulak Center through past projects. But we'll get a chance to see, what do they do? How do they capture, the things that the Marine Corps is doing or has done via the Combat Art program. So that'll be next Thursday. But make sure you're following us so that you can get the registration information. All right, gentlemen, again, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.